Deja vu is that weird, fleeting feeling that you've lived through a moment before. We've all experienced it. Most people brush it off as a brain glitch or a coincidence. But sometimes it feels wrong, like reality is repeating itself in ways it shouldn't. These are 4 allegedly true stories of deja vu that didn't fade away, but rather, they spiraled into something terrifying. I don't usually talk about this with people because of how insane it sounds, but something happened to me back in 2017 that made me question not just my sanity, but the structure of reality itself. I was living in a pretty dingy apartment complex in central New Jersey, a 3-story brick building that probably hadn't been renovated since the late 80s, the kind of place where the hallway lights buzzed faintly and every door had chipped paint and mismatched locks. I lived there with my roommate Nick, who worked security night shifts for a warehouse just outside of town. Most nights, I had the place to myself. It was a Thursday night in early February when I came home a little later than usual. I remember walking up the stairs and getting hit with a smell I hadn't smelled in years. Burned rubber mixed with some kind of citrus cleaner. That smell triggered something in me. This strange and sudden memory that felt like it belonged to someone else. As I walked down the hallway, the feeling of deja vu hit me like a sledgehammer. Not just a flash of familiarity, but an overwhelming sensation that I had lived this exact moment before in precise, granular detail. I stopped about 5 ft from my door and froze. I knew what was going to happen next. The light above me would flicker twice. A woman from downstairs would yell something muffled and then laugh. Then, at the far end of the hallway, something heavy would fall. A dull, metallic thud. And it happened in that exact order, exactly as I knew it would. I remember standing there, not even scared yet, just confused. I thought maybe I had dreamed it. But then it happened again the next night. This time, I was watching TV, eating leftover Chinese food, and suddenly, I knew the scene I was going to play before it happened. The lines of dialogue, the background noise, even the timing of a phone buzz from my nightstand. Over the next 5 days, these moments became more frequent. I began writing them down, testing myself, and every time I was correct. I knew things I couldn't have known, like the exact time Nick would text me, or the moment a neighbor's dog would start barking. But they weren't memories. They were reminders of something I hadn't lived yet. That's when the dream started. I dreamed I was lying in bed, and the door opened. Nick walked in, pale and dripping sweat, and said, "There's someone in the building." His voice sounded wrong, like too flat, like it was being played from a recording. I asked who, and he just stared at me. That dream played every night. But the final night, it wasn't a dream. At 3:12 a.m., my door opened, and Nick was standing there saying the exact same words. I followed him into the hallway with a bat in hand. He pointed toward the stairwell. There was no one, but something felt off. The shadows didn't move the way they should. We called the police. Nothing. I told Nick about the dreams, and he just stared at me and said, "I've been having them too." Neither of us said anything else. The deja vu ended that night, but ever since then, I sometimes catch the flicker of something. A memory, a sense, a noise, and I wonder if I'm about to remember something before it happens again. Because if that door opens again and I hear those words, I don't know if I'll be able to follow this time. I've started to question if what we think of as a memory is really just our brain accessing timelines stacked atop one another, like layers of old wallpaper, each layer faintly bleeding into the next. Sometimes I think the hallway itself is some kind of weak point, a seam between 2 versions of reality. I moved out 6 months after that night. I've driven past that building more than once, and each time, I swear I feel a tug, like my body wants to stop and go in. Part of me still believes there's something waiting at the end of that hallway. Not a person or a ghost, just a decision I haven't made in this version of my life. And every time I think about it, I feel like I'm closer to making it. My name is Ryan. This happened 3 years ago when I was 17, and my brother Chris was 19. We live in a small town surrounded by woods. Not much happens here, so kids like us get bored pretty easily. There's a trail near our house that leads into the forest. It goes on for miles. People say there are old buildings and weird stuff hidden deep in the trees. and we always talked about going to explore it, but never did until one weekend in October. We had nothing to do, and Chris said we should finally check out the house he heard about from other kids at school. It was a cool, cloudy day. The leaves were all changing colors, so it was a nice, scenic walk. Actually, we packed water and flashlights, told our mom we were going hiking, and left around 3 in the afternoon. The sun sets early in October, so we figured we had maybe 2 hours to go and get back. The walk started out normal. It's not like I hadn't hiked in these woods before. But after maybe 10 minutes, I started to feel weird. It felt like I had walked this specific trail before, like I remembered this specific walk and conversation with my brother. Even when we found a broken fence post on the trail, I felt like I remembered that exact moment. But I had never been down this trail before. I was sure of it. Chris was ahead of me talking about something random, but I didn't really hear him at this point. I kept looking around, and everything felt too familiar. I knew there would be a thick tree with a big hole in it near the side of the trail, and 5 minutes later, we passed it. I didn't say anything out loud, like I've experienced déjà vu before. This time, it just felt weirdly more intense. The deeper we went, the more memories came back. I started to remember a house, a 2-story house with green paint peeling off and a broken front step. I saw it clearly in my head. I remembered a broken window on the top floor and dead vines going up the side. But I had never seen this house before in real life. I didn't say anything to my brother yet, though. We finally reached the house between 3:30 and 4:00 p.m., and when I saw it, I felt like my stomach dropped. It was the same exact house I was picturing in my head, down to just about every last detail. I just stared at it while Chris kept walking toward the porch. I wanted to turn around and leave. In that moment, I actually started questioning if I'd seen this house before, even though I was almost positive I hadn't. I asked Chris if it felt familiar to him, and he acted confused and said no. Then he asked what I meant. I told him straight up I felt a weird sense of déjà vu of this exact moment. I didn't want to chicken it out, though, so we kept going. The front door was cracked open, indicating we weren't the first to have the genius idea of exploring this place. Chris pushed it open slowly, and it made a long, squeaking sound as it opened. Inside, it smelled like what you'd expect a long, abandoned house to smell like, and the silence in there was almost deafening, like it felt heavy on my ears. We stepped inside, and there was broken furniture, old wallpaper peeling off, and a staircase going up on the left side of the room. We looked around the first floor for a while. There was a kitchen with no lights, a living room with a fireplace, and a hallway with one closed door at the end. The whole time, it felt like someone was watching us. At least to me, it did. Chris made a comment that the place is kind of creepy, and I couldn't agree more. Then I said something without thinking. I said, "I remember being here before." Chris stopped walking and just turned to me and said, "What do you mean?" I didn't even mean to say it. The words just came out on their own. I repeated myself. I said, "I remember this place, the kitchen, that hallway, even the fireplace, and I remember a woman upstairs." Chris's response was one you'd expect, an automatic assumption that I was trying to add to the creepy atmosphere and freak him out. I told him straight up, "I'm not trying to scare you. I just have a weird memory of being here and someone being upstairs." I could tell it did creep him out a bit. But I mean, in a setting like this, it isn't hard to freak people out. We stood there for a second. Then we heard a noise, a soft creak, like a floorboard being stepped on. They came from upstairs. Chris looked at me and I looked at him. We didn't say anything for a few seconds. He dared me to go upstairs and check it out. I said, "Absolutely not," and advised we get out of there. He somehow convinced me to play rock, paper, scissors to see who would go up there and check out the upstairs. I lost, but I still refused to go up there. Chris still would rather go up there than to leave the house right then. As he walked up the stairs, each step creaked. I followed behind, but I stayed at the top of the stairs while he walked toward the room where the noise had seemingly come from. It was the last room on the right. The door was slightly open. He reached out and pushed it open more. I couldn't see what was inside from where I was standing, but Chris saw something in there. He froze, and then, out of nowhere, he screamed and almost shoved me down the stairs. He yelled, "Run!" And we flew down the stairs and out the front door. We didn't stop running, not even when we reached the trail again. We kept going until we were completely out of breath. When we finally stopped, we were bent over trying to breathe. My heart was beating so bad I could barely hear. "What did you see?" I asked. Chris looked at me and said, "There was a woman in there staring out the window like a statue." When I asked him what she looked like, he said all he really noticed was her hair, which was shoulder length and grayish blonde. He kept asking me how the hell I knew there would be a woman up there. I accused him of lying to prank me, that he probably thought I was trying to scare him, so he flipped the script on me, but he never caved. He never told me he was kidding. He insisted for days, weeks, months, even years later today that he wasn't kidding. And he saw that woman in there. Part of me knows there's a possibility he did flip what he thought was a prank back on me. But deep down, I believe him. We both heard that sound from upstairs. It came from someone or something alive. My déjà vu or premonitions or whatever you want to call it were also way too specific to be coincidental. I'm glad I wasn't the only one to look into that room. This experience changed my definition of the term déjà vu. In 2020, during one of those strange in-between phases of lockdown and reopened stores, I had a stretch of time that felt less like reality and more like I was walking through a scripted loop I couldn't escape. I was driving home late from my girlfriend's house, maybe 1:30 in the morning. It had just snowed, not heavy, but enough to turn the road slick. I live in a small town outside Scranton, Pennsylvania, and there's this one intersection near my place that's infamous for accidents. It has 4 stop signs, but no lights, and on snowy nights, you have to basically guess if the other driver will obey them. As I approached the intersection, I felt something heavy settle in my chest. It wasn't fear at first, just a strange sense of being out of place, like I had stepped into a moment I had already lived. I slowed down, even though I had the right of way. Then, without warning, a black pickup truck blew through the stop sign on my left. If I hadn't hit the brakes early, it would have plowed straight into my side. I pulled over, shaking, watching the taillights vanish into the snow. That would have killed me. I knew it. But what scared me more was that I knew it was coming. Not in the way you anticipate danger. I mean, I remembered it. I remembered the details like the crunching metal and the glass and the airbag crushing my face. None of it happened, but I remembered it like a fact. I chalked it up to stress. The pandemic, the isolation, whatever. But then, a few nights later, I had another episode. I was at a red light, and I remembered the song that would come on the radio before it did. I remembered the woman walking her dog across the street even though I couldn't see her yet. I started to feel like I wasn't living in the present anymore, just reenacting it. Then the dreams began. Same road, same crash, each night more vivid. In one dream, I got out of the car and saw my own body slumped in the driver's seat, with my eyes glassy and a long gash across my temple. I could hear myself trying to breathe. On the 5th night, I woke up in a sweat and told myself I wouldn't take that route again. I drove 10 minutes out of the way and took the highway instead. Later that day, I got a message from a friend. There had been a fatal crash at that same intersection, same time I usually drove through it. Same make and color of my car, a different person, but the same ending. Ever since then, I've wondered, was I remembering my own death in another timeline? Was some part of me rerouted at the last second? Or was I just another version that got lucky while another me didn't? I haven't had déjà vu like that since, but sometimes when I drive at night and the road looks too familiar, I get chills because maybe some part of me remembers something I'm not supposed to. I later looked into near-death experiences and found people reporting the same kind of thing, memories of things that hadn't happened yet, only they always involved a close brush with death. Maybe déjà vu is just a side effect of slipping through the cracks. Maybe time isn't a line at all, but a constantly reloading loop, and occasionally something inside us remembers what happened before the reset. If that's true, then every time we avoid disaster, it might not be because of luck. It might be because we've already lived through it, and some part of us is trying desperately to keep it from happening again. Music. Before I worked in IT, I spent 2 years doing overnight shifts at a long-term care home in upstate New York. It was an old facility, a little rundown, but decent enough. We had a few residents with Alzheimer's or advanced dementia, but most were stable, just elderly and needing care. There was one woman named Miss Adelaide. She was 87, mostly lucid, very sweet, and kept to herself. She had a faded photo of a young boy on her nightstand that she called her grandson, but no one ever visited her. Over the first few months, I developed a routine: midnight rounds, patient checks every hour. Most nights were uneventful, but every so often I'd find Miss Adelaide awake, staring at the ceiling, humming some slow, eerie tune. One night around 2:15 a.m., I found her sitting up, eyes wide open. When I asked if she needed anything, she said without blinking, "You already asked me that. You ask every night, but tonight is different." I felt this strange feeling in my gut, like she was reading a script for my future. I laughed nervously and offered her water. She declined and added, "You should remember this part." I told my supervisor, who brushed it off as confusion or dream state talk. But the next night, I got the same response from her, word for word. On the third night, she was gone. Passed in her sleep around 1:50 a.m. When I went to her room for rounds, the bed was freshly made, and her belongings were already boxed. I couldn't stop thinking about what she said. I did some digging through old records and archived notes. It turns out another night staff member had reported similar things in her file from years ago. Always at night, around 2 a.m. She repeated phrases and predicted exact actions, and even once said the name of a new nurse before they introduced themselves. One entry from 2013 had her saying, "I remember this version. You take your break at 3:07. You always do." And according to the note, the nurse had just looked at their watch. It was 3007. I don't know what was happening with Miss Adelaide. I don't really believe in the paranormal, but it seemed to me that she was in some kind of loop or glitch. I can't really explain it, but it seems to me that maybe she was stuck, watching her life play out again and again, waiting for it to end differently. Now, I work behind a desk, but I still get the occasional wave of déjà vu. And when I do, I stop and listen, because maybe it's not just a trick of the brain. Maybe it's a message. Maybe it's Miss Adelaide or someone like her reaching out across timelines trying to remind us we've been here before. And it didn't end well. I've since met people who worked at that same care home, both years apart. And without me saying anything, they mentioned that they used to have weird dreams at night while working there. One even said a patient warned her she'd be fired soon, and then she was let go a week later due to downsizing. She didn't remember the patient's name. I just nodded and said how interesting that was. I think about Miss Adelaide often, and sometimes when I'm falling asleep, I hear that same eerie humming from my dreams. I can't help but still think about Miss Adelaide all the time.